Okay, so I'm in Western Massachusetts, and our council camp is the Horace A. Moses Scout Reservation. And before I start, I'd like to I don't know if Rob Cutts is on the call. I know he was up our way for a while. He just went home. He might not be on tonight, but he helped me proof this thing. I had a lot of typos, a lot of mistakes. I had in my presentation notes, and a couple of these patches are actually Rob's. This first one is Rob's. The only difference between the first 2 years is if you'll see there's a 2 on this one. The Ranger's wife put a 2 on for second-year campers. Other than that, it's identical, but I don't have one without the 2. So that's Rob's image. So anyway, let me get started. So the camp opened in 1946 as Camp Woronoak. So that's what the W is. And Woronoak is the neighborhood in Russell, Massachusetts, where the camp is currently located. They changed the name to Horace A. Moses Scout Reservation in 1949. And that's named for the man who sold him the land. He's also the founder of the 4-H clubs, and he had a summer home on the property. For the first few years, the patches were made of felt. And in 1947, she added the 2. And then in the years after that, she also added this W and H and S. And that stood for worthy and honor. And those were earned. And staff was, the black S was for senior staff, and the yellow S was for junior staff. Anyway, the tradition of those letters actually started, these 2 camp patches down at the bottom here from Camp Sherman. Camp Sherman closed after the 1945 camp season, and they had the same program. So when they opened up they opened up Camp Woronoak in 1946, they continued on with the same program of earned letters. And they also, in 1949, they started making them out of twill, saved the Ranger's wife a little work. And some people sewed the letters on, but they also made these little brass letters with points on the corner, so you could kind of push it through the patch and fold them over. And again, the black S was for senior staff. Okay, so in 1955, they started making this triangular patch, and they put the name of the Scout Reservation on there. But as you can see, Horace A. Moses Scout Reservation is a little busy. So in 1957, they kind of dropped it down to the Moses Scout Reservation. And in 1959, they held a camporee. And even though this isn't an official camp patch, almost all the Camp Moses collectors that I'm aware of consider this to be part of the collection. You know, if you don't have it, it's a need. In 1961, they merged with Mount Tom Council, the Hamden Council and Mount Tom Councils merged to form Pioneer Valley Council. And so they changed the patch. And this patch is probably the most common patch of all the Camp Moses patches, because they used it from 1961 to 1969. And as anybody who knows camps, those were the golden years. We had, thousands of boy weeks those years. And so there's a lot of these patches. So even though they're 50 years old, they're still the most common patch around. The flower in the middle of these patches, by the way, is a fairly uncommon species of thistle that can occasionally be found growing wild in the camp, but it was also the symbol of the Strathmore Paper Company, which was owned by Horace Moses, and that's where he made his money. Also in the 60s, they made a series of rockers that were all earned and I'll have more on the next page. And the ubiquitous hat diamond that it seems like every camp had. So these were the other rockers. They made these honor camper rockers from 63 to 67. And Larry, your holy grail there, this 64 camper frown is my holy grail. They made smiles out of all the rest, but 64 they made both. And then I've seen it in person, so I know it exists. But it's a real difficult patch to find. Definitely a need for me. So in 1970, we had the 25th anniversary, and they made this patch, still the same design, but 25th anniversary. And then for the next 10 years, they kind of bounced around with different designs. This one was in the early 70s, and they made instead of using the brass letters, they made these honor and worthy arcs segments. And then they made an interesting dome shape in the early 70s. And they also implemented a Camp Master program in the early 70s. And those are pretty hard to find. And then they also used it for their Cub resident camp. And that was undated for a couple of years. And then in 74, they made this round and they dated it. And circa 1976, it was the first year they made a youth camper and an adult staff camper. Knox Trail. So in the 60s, there were 3 camps that comprised the reservation. The old Woronoak camp from the early days. There was a Knox camp, and there was a rustic camp Pioneer that was on the other side of the lake from the main camps. So anyway, the reason this is called Knox is because legend has it that when General Knox brought the cannons from Fort Ticonderoga in New York to Boston during the Revolutionary War, the path they took, the trail they took, went right through camp. So that's whether or not that's true is hard to prove, but Horace A. Moses believed that, and that's why he bought that camp. So in 77, 78, 79, they had the same design basically. In 79, they went back to using the one for the youth and one for the adult, but they grossly underordered the adult one, this light blue one. So they did a reorder, but the border came in much darker. So these light blue ones are really scarce. They're really hard to find. All 3 of these are hard to find, but this one is like hen's teeth. Then in 1980, they had the 35th anniversary. And in 1981, they had the Christmas tree. And then from this point on, they pretty much did a youth camper and adult staff patch until present day. So these are just a few of the years. In 1985, they did the 40th anniversary. Again, 86, 87, 89. Just different border colors and stuff like that to designate the different adult and youth. In 1990, we had a new camp director, and he decided to shake things up a little bit. He was there for a couple of years, and he made this more arrowhead shaped patch, and then he kept the thistle. And then the following year, because Knox is pretty much where the summer camp has been held probably since the mid 70s to present. He went with the Knox with the cross cannons for the Knox Trail. In 92, he was gone, and they brought back the old style. And most of the time they did just a border change, but every now and then, the change was a little more esoteric. Like on this one there, you see the silver mylar goes into the middle and the gold mylar. But in this one here, the only difference is this little arrowhead in the middle is one's silver, one's gold. So you have to know what you're looking for there. It's funny, in 2001, they made the pink, and the youth thought it was pretty cool. They thought it was pretty funny to have pink, but some of the staff were less impressed with, Boy Scouts having a pink patch. So some of the staff refused to wear it, especially the hats. They had these pink hats. Some of the staff just weren't going to wear that. 2002, just a normal year. In 2003, they ordered the same patches as always, but they came in 4 inches instead of 3 inches. So they kept those and they sold them in the trading post, but they reordered and got the standard 3-inch patch, just like the other years. And then 2004. In 2005, they made another trading post issue because in 2003 they sold pretty well. And this one was pretty popular as well. And then notice these other ones here. These are 2006 patches. So the following year, they ordered these ghost patches, but if you'll notice, they came in with a 2006 year, which was errored. Supposed to be these bottom ones, 2007. So they reordered. They kept the 2006 errors, and they gave them as gifts to the NYLT staff, and they sold them to a couple of well-known collectors, myself included. But there's a controversy that comes around those because they said the plan was to destroy the extras, and these are really hard to come by, believe me. So you might think that they did that, but rumors started floating around right afterwards that a youth member of that NYLT staff ended up with them. Now, I know his brother and have asked him to check on this. He told me that his brother, by the way, neither of them are patch guys, half remembers these patches and thinks they might be in his mother's basement. So I've been bugging him it's been a few years now. I've been bugging them, and so far they haven't checked. And at this point, who knows? Maybe we'll find out someday whether they actually did destroy them or whether they're sitting in a box in this kid's cellar. So this was an interesting patch. In 2007, they made this program, and these were all earned segments, and these are the requirements. And it was dated 2007. It was kind of a problem, and part of the reason I think that these became pretty scarce was because if you went to first of all, if you earned it, you still had to buy it at the trading post. Nothing for nothing. And so you went to the trading post, and this was a $3 patch, but these were all $3 patches. And I remember arguing with the girl in the trading post saying, the segments aren't $3, they're probably $1. But she had a box that said $3 and she wasn't going to come off of it, and there was no reasoning with her. So I only bought one set because you had to buy 7 of them plus the middle one. That's $24. That's a lot of money for one little patch set. The star one you couldn't buy. You had to earn that by showing Scout Spirit, and the camp director and the program director had a pocket full of those. And if they caught you doing something that displayed Scout Spirit, they would give you one. So getting one of those was kind of a process. The following year, they took the date off because they figured they'd be able to use it for a number of years. But 2008 was the last year of Pioneer Valley Council because we merged again and became the Western Mass Council. So, and because that 2007 patch was not very well received in the trading post, not sure whatever happened to the extras, but those are extremely hard to find. And for a long time, the segments were extremely hard to find. But anyway, probably about 10 years later, they moved the trading post to a new building, and in a box under a box under a box, they found all the old segments. So they made them much more affordable. You still couldn't. Who knows what happened to these? But you could get the 7. So in 2009, we became the Western Mass Council, and they made this camp patch here, and then they made a generic patch for each of the two camps. So the merger was great, but in order to everybody thought it would be great if you only use one camp as long as you use our camp. You know how it is with a merger. Half the people wanted to use Moses, the other half people wanted to use Chesterfield. So what they did was they went back and forth week after week. 1 week at Moses, 1 week at Chesterfield, 1 week at Moses, 1 week at Chesterfield. It was a disaster. It was a logistical nightmare, moving everything back and forth, and they definitely lost money. So in 2010, they made a much cooler patch, and they made these rockers, and it was a 100th anniversary, so they made the VSA 2010. They made one for each camp, and talking to council insiders at the time, there was definitely a plan to make 2 more to fill out the circle, but plans fall through, and for some reason they just never got around to making those other 2 rockers. But once again, they did the 1 week didn't work, so this time they tried 2 weeks and 2 weeks, and it was still a logistical nightmare, and they still lost money. So in 2011, they decided they couldn't afford to keep doing that at a loss, so they did not offer a summer camp program. They worked out a deal with Connecticut Rivers with their June Norcross Webster, Jan Webster Scout Reservation, which is a beautiful camp, by the way. I've been there for conclaves and stuff like that. It really is a nice camp. And but this year was the Cub Resident Day staff camp. So a staff patch rather. So this was the only Moses 2011 patch, and they were really hard to get. They didn't make a whole lot more than they actually needed, and even in 2011 they were tough. Anyway, in 2012, a lot of the former staff, most of them teachers and stuff like that, with the summers off, got together and offered to staff summer camp for free. They paid the youth staff, but the adult camp staff was all volunteer. And I think in response to that, they made adult and youth camper staff, adult and youth campers all got the same patch, and they made a staff patch just for the staff to give them something other than, something for working for free. And then in 2013, I think it was in 2014, they started paying the staff again. But an interesting error in 2014, and I'm only aware of one. So the camper and staff patches had a different border color and a different writing on the bottom. And I have a camper patch with the writing on the bottom, but with a staff border. One of the kids in the OA, Noah, patch collector, he ended up getting this, and he traded it to me. So I'm not aware of any others. I'd be surprised if there are no others, but probably not too many. It was probably one of those things when they switched over the loom run, they got the border wrong for a couple. So in 2015, another new camp director, and this guy's been around a long time. He was part of that first wood badge class that we had back in the early 70s. I can't remember exactly, but 1975 maybe. He was around even before that. And so he decided he was going to go with the camp theme of that year, which was pirates. The camp staff was not impressed. They asked for and were granted permission to make their own staff patch in the original style, which they did. They pre-ordered them. They took pre-orders, and fortunately they allowed others to participate in their pre-order program. So I was able to get a few of these. In 2016, still trying to, make things different, the same camp director went ahead and I'll show you what he did now. He made a trading post issue. He made a youth camper issue. And just an aside on the youth camper issue, this here looks kind of like a thread break, except I've seen probably a dozen of these now, or certainly 10 anyway, that are exactly the same as this. So it doesn't seem like it's a thread break. But anyway, it's an odd error. And there aren't that many of them, but there are enough to make me think it's not exactly a thread break. Then he made the adult leader, summer camp staff, and this was for Cub resident camp. But he also made leader training. So if you took something like safe swim defense or climbing on safely, that kind of thing, safety afloat, you got one of these. Mile swim, polar bear swim club, and then they also had a polar cub swim club. And they didn't date these because they thought they'd be using them year after year after year. But after the first run, they never made any more. So, they dried up after a year or two, and we haven't made them. This is an interesting patch. They also made this in 2016. It's just a generic patch. It's not the trading post patch because that had the gold border. But they made tons of these. And as you'll see in a minute, a little later, a couple years later, we reinvigorated the Camp Master program, and we started giving these out to kids from other councils that came and spent a weekend at our camp, just to kind of give them an incentive to come back. So they must have made thousands of these. I've seen sleeves of 50 or 100, and I've seen drawers full of them. In 2017, they made the big four: youth camper, adult leader, staff, and resident camp. They also made this Adventurers Club, which was, they made a couple of club things here. This Adventurers Club was going to be pretty interesting. It was going to be an extra cost program where the youth were going to be transported off site to different activities like rock climbing, whitewater rafting, and stuff like that. But so few parents were willing to pay the extra price that it never got off the ground. So they made the patches, but they never actually had the program. I know the young man who was going to be the kind of the leader of that program was pretty disappointed that it fell through. And then in the evening they had an archery program and an ecology program, and we have ATVs at Camp Moses. So if you went through all the training, and the training is pretty extensive, and then you went through one of the rides through the backcountry at camp, you were able to get this ATV club. And these are some more of the camp clubs. We have a pretty good sized climbing. Well, this is for Cope, but we have a pretty good sized climbing tower, and it's called Pikes Peak. And the reason it's called that is because the first camp director back in the 40s, his name was Gene Pike, and he was actually present the day they opened this. He came, and his wife brought him, and he helped dedicate the climbing wall. And I have a better picture of that than on this patch a little later on. Sharpshooters was you could do skeet and stuff like that in the evenings at the rifle range. 2018, they did the same, core 4 with the summer camp for the youth, adult leader, camp staff, and this one was the Cub Resident Day, Cub Resident Camp. Also in 2018, they instituted an ATV Night Ride. So you did all the training and stuff like that, and you took a ride during the day, but then you took the same ride, but at night. So the kids and actually the adults have a lot of fun with that. In 2019, they made these kind of, this is like a video game at an arcade council. One of the kids designed that. We kept the same type of patch, but we replaced the thistle. This is the Scoutmaster one with a coffee cup. And then this is the staff. And this was the theme for Cub Resident Camp Under the Sea. In 2020, as I'm sure most of you experienced, they didn't know what was going to happen with COVID, so they went ahead, recruited and hired a summer camp staff, but then summer camp got canceled. So the camp director, they were going to have this, traveling through time, a theme. And so he went out and on his own dime, he bought enough patches for the entire summer camp staff, and he mailed them out to all of them. So that was pretty nice. 2021, they kept that theme since they'd already designed the patch. And they made, but because it was interesting in 2021, they ran the Cub and Boy Scout program kind of under the same flag. So they didn't make a separate Cub patch that year. And they also didn't have a lot of extras at the end of camp, because in 2021, the camp was open, but with restrictions. And a lot of the Eastern Massachusetts councils, their camps are in New Hampshire. And in 2021, if you left the state, you had to quarantine before you could come back. So we had a banner year that year. We had one of the most attended summer camps in 2021 that we've had in probably 2 decades, because we had a lot of out of council people that couldn't go to their own camps because they were out of state. They ran out of those 2018 ATV Night Ride clubs, so they made a new one without a date, so it was a little more flexible. This summer they had a Wild West theme, and they sticking with the summer camp where they didn't make a separate Cub one, but they made summer camp adult leader and staff, and they had a pretty good year this year also, and they ended up with not very many of these left over. Okay, so that's all. That brings us up to date for summer camp. So these are some of the extra patches that over the years that have been produced. So a lot of camps that I'm aware of have old power wagons from the 50s. I mean, these things, you can't kill these things. They go up and down hills, they climb trees. Um, so, but they need a little TLC, and so they made this patch as a fundraiser to get some of the power wagons back up to snuff. This is an interesting patch. Pecumtuck is our lodge, and we started this briefly back in the early 2000 teens, but we brought it back in 2019. And what it is if you go to camp, it's only a 1 week program, 1 week of camp, not the entire run of summer camp, but the first week of camp, if you come up to camp, and in the morning you stay with your troop, and in the morning, rather than doing merit badges, so this is good for older scouts who don't need the merit badges. So Pecumtuck Lodge does camp service. We pick some kind of service project, and we work on it. And then for the 3 hours in the morning, in the afternoon, you get to rejoin your troop. In the evening, same thing, merit badges in the evening, whatever, cope. But just for those 3 hours in the morning. And the reason it's such an advantage is because you go to camp for about 1/3 the cost. You basically only pay for your food, and then because you're giving up those 15 hours or 18 hours of service, then you don't pay the rest. This patch was made by Allegagan, which is our old lodge, and it's a back patch, and it has representations for the lodge. Here's the camp, and this yoke and cannon was our old CSP for the council. So kind of covered all the bases. Also in 2019, we revised the Camp Master program, and so these are both earned. You have to go through a day of training, and you have to go through that training every single year. Drives me nuts, but you go through the training every year, and then if you do, so you got to work a whole weekend, which is a Friday from about 5 o'clock until the last person leaves on Sunday. And you check people in. You're there for whatever they need. It allows the ranger to kind of have his weekends off, which he should. And so if you do 2 weekends, you get the green patch. If you work 4 weekends, you get the gold patch. So another program that they have at camp is called WOA, which is the Woronoak Heights Outdoor Adventure. And it's open to scouts and non-scouts alike. It's 1 week, one Saturday a month, year round, except for at summer camp. And during the winter, they have a winter program where you do snowshoeing, ice fishing, you do some other, winter activities, winter first aid and stuff like that. And if you do the whole program, you earn this Yukon Challenge patch. In 2020 was the 75th anniversary of the camp, and they had this really, big gala affair planned with camp tours, and it was a whole weekend, and COVID canceled the whole thing, so they had to push it back. They did end up holding it in September of 2021 after the camp season was over, and it was great. All right, so this is kind of an interesting patch. From probably the 90s, early 90s through 2017, there was a father and son who everybody, much beloved father and son, who are our camp chefs. And the dad was getting a little old in the years, and when he passed away, his son just stepped up and took over. In 2017, after, and by the way, his son was a big patch collector, so he made points there as well. In 2017, at a fairly young age, he unexpectedly passed away, and because he was so much beloved by both the staff and the campers, they wanted to do something to remember his years of service. And so that's what these are. These are the first three were issued in 2018, and they are for staff that go above and beyond the call. If a camper recognizes a staff member for going above and beyond and reports it to the camp director, they get the red hat. If a staff member reports it, or a staff member goes out of his way to help another staff member, he gets the black hat. And if the camp director or program director witnessed the extraordinary service themselves, then they're liable to give you the gold hat. And that was all there was the first year. But in 2018, I think it was, we had a camper, an adult camper, who came up and spent the whole week just giving back to camp. He showed up early for meals and helped the camp's kitchen staff serve every single meal all week long. He was always picking up sticks and rocks at the parade field so the mower wouldn't hit it. And one day he even organized his troop and did a service project in camp. And at that point they realized that, we don't have any way of recognizing that kind of selflessness for campers. So they made the green hat, and he was awarded one. Not until the following year, because they didn't make him until the following year. This is an interesting one. Two longtime members of our staff. This Byron here, he's probably 43 years old now. Never left. He was, from the time he was a youth until this morning. He has been hanging around camp. He's on the maintenance staff now. And when they got married, they had their reception at the dining hall at camp, and they made these patches for everybody that was there. Nice couple, great couple. And their daughter is now growing up at camp. In 2017, the program director, his girlfriend decided to jazz things up a little bit, and she made these epaulets for camp staff. She made them for 3 years, and then in 2020, when camp was closed, the camp director didn't come back in 2021, so that was the end of those. But for those 3 years, these are pretty cool, and they're hard to get now. They sold out. They did have some in the trading post, but they sold out relatively quickly, and they haven't been seen since. So in the 90s, we had this very cool polar bear patch, and when those ran out, they got this much less cool, in my opinion. Doesn't even have the camp name, but anyway, they made these, and they used these throughout the early 2000s. I can't remember exactly when they started issuing the Scoutmaster's merit badge, but probably about 15 years ago, and they still do. And after you earn the merit badge, you can earn your palms, or in this case, your spoons. Probably about 8 years ago, the camp staff, 7 years ago, the camp staff formed a crew. And so the first couple of years they had these founder patches. And then after that, they finally dropped the founder. And so that's what these are. These are all from camp staff. And then these three here are patches from programs that they had. These two are from the 60s, and this one is from the 90s. This is an interesting patch. In 95, they realized that, it was kind of a perfect storm of anniversaries that had come up. It was the 85th anniversary of the BSA, the 60th anniversary of the Lodge, the 20th anniversary of the first Wood Badge course in the council, the 25th anniversary of Powderhorn, which was our old NYLT course. And then when Venturing took over the Powderhorn name, they went with NYLT. And it was the 50th anniversary of the camp. So they made a back patch and a pocket patch. These were in the mid 2000s. They decided they were going to make, we had a new assistant council exec, and he came from a council where they made say CSPs because of changes in wind direction. So they made these patches, which I think they're great. They made one for anybody who wanted one, and one for leaders. They made them 2 years in a row. This was our trading post at the time, but now it's our commissioner's corner. So the camp commissioners stay in there during the summer camp. And this is our waterfront. And so they only made them for 2 years, and then that exec moved on. But I think these were probably in 2017 and 2018. They made these again. This is so Horace A. Moses lived in the summer on this camp, and this was his manor house. And it's hard to see in this picture, but this is we have a chapel, down in the woods, and that's what this is. And so what the deal with these was, anybody could buy the two on the left, but the two on the right, if your camp was, if you signed up to bring more than 50% of your registered youth, and they were all paid by a certain date, the Scoutmaster got one of these. And then later the extras were sold in the trading post, but at a much higher cost than these two. The camp decided to start making staff CSPs in 2020. So they sent these out to the would-be staff. And then in 2021, and they only made 75 of each of these. So if you weren't on staff, you probably didn't get one. I was lucky to be on staff, so I managed to get these. And then here's some other stuff. Just these are trail markers. They mark some of the trails in camp. This is an old 1960s decal listing the three camps on the reservation. This button, things are looking up, was given out the day they opened the climbing tower. This is a Neil slide, which is pretty nice. I got really lucky on this one because the guy who was selling it on eBay didn't know what it was. He just put Arrowhead. So I got it for like 10 or 15 bucks. This was an old Camp Woronoak and General Knox. It was probably from the 60s. There's a rivet in the middle. You actually bought this and you had to, put it together yourself after you painted it. And as I said, in 1976, they made a lot of other stuff. This was a belt loop, but they made bolos, they made neckerchiefs, they made a million things. They made other belt buckles. This is a tie pin they gave out to Scoutmasters in the year 2000. Like every camp during the 60s, 70s, 80s, they gave out mugs. This is just one example. This is also a belt buckle, the more recent origin, probably in the last 4 or 5 years. I have several old felt banners. This is probably the easiest one to photograph, which is why it's in there. This is what our climbing tower looks like. I think it's probably about 60 feet high, give or take. And the kids have a lot of fun. I remember when they first opened it, I was there, and a little girl, she looked like she was about 10 years old, went over. And I thought, well, there's no way she's going to get up that thing. And once they, got her, tied in and everything, and, the belayers are ready, she scampered up that thing in about 3 minutes. It was less than that. It was amazing. And she had a great time, belaying off. She just basically jumped off and let him lower her down. So that was, it was a fun day for everybody. Of course, we've also made neckerchiefs. This was in the early days of the old Camp Woronoak. This is probably from the early 50s, late 40s. This was when it was still Hamden Council in the 50s. Then they Pioneer Valley Council, and nowadays they have regular they have a regular neckerchief like this, not staff and camper, just one generic one. But they also make these like kerchiefs kind of thing, bandanas, and they have a whole variety of colors. Oh, in 2010, this was a kind of a favorite of mine. 2010, they actually made that same patch that I like. They made the neckerchief and staff neckerchief, and they only made them for that 1 year, and they were hard to get. I managed to get this one at camp, but I had to chase out somebody from staff, and I paid a premium to get this one.
A few Florida camps don't try to do summer camp anymore, but they will do a winter camp. Is that happening in other parts of the country?
Well, we don't do a winter camp per se, but we do that Woronoak Heights, which is the neighborhood the camp is in. Woronoak Heights Outdoor Adventure, which we do all winter long, but only on one Saturday a month. And it's not just scouts. We have people from all over come into that. They have a great time. They go out the back of camp to there's a street back there, an old street back there, and there's a sugar house on it. So they get to go out and see how maple sugar is made, and they get samples. They go all over camp. They do a lot of fun stuff. When the lake is frozen, they do ice fishing. When there's snow, they do snowshoeing. But it's just 1 day a month. It's not a whole week of camp.
There are other camps in New England that do have a winter camp, but I'm not aware of any where they're only open in the winter. for a couple of years, Theodore L's store, Scout Reservation, which is part of the Spirit of Adventure Council now, they had shut it down for summer camp and only were doing like winter and weekends. But I think that's all been changed at this point. That was just kind of during the COVID years, if you will. But there are camps that do have a very active winter camp. Camp Hines up in Pine Tree Council in Maine is one of those.
We live in Canada. If we don't camp in the winter, we're only stuck with 3 months of camping.